How's it going, everyone? I'm Donovan and this is How to Happy. In this video we're going to be talking about drugs and happiness and how those two things are related. Now, chances are that you hold some strong opinions on drugs and how they should be used. You're probably on one side or the other, right? Wow, you should never drink because that's always going to result in negativity. Or, wow, you should not worry that much if somebody has a beer or a blunt or whatever. And you might think that I'm going to fall on one side or the other of that fence, but I think the discussion around drugs is a little bit more nuanced than that, and there are some more ideas that we can delve into and discuss, especially as they relate to happiness. Now, before we move any farther, I want to make it really clear that I'm not advocating for drug use as the best path to find happiness. If you're struggling with these kinds of issues, I really recommend that you look at another route because drugs are not really a reliable source of happiness. There are other ways that you can find it that you do not need to take that path. In addition, I want to clarify that I'm using the word drug pretty broadly. When I say drugs, I'm referring mainly to ones that are considered relatively low danger, relatively safe. I know we can debate the specifics of that some other time, but that's mostly what I'm referring to are these drugs that kind of fall into safer categories. All that being said, I don't really want to go into a discussion of very specific drugs, and I think there's something we can talk about on the general level that is still useful. It seems to me a lot of times that the conversation around different drugs devolves into this kind of binary. Either you should never ever use them, or it's okay to use them all the time. And I think there's a very fine line where casual use can devolve into something else that is a little bit more destructive. I've also heard a lot of people in the productivity realms basically say that you should never really mess with any substances. However, as a counterexample, I like to do something like if I'm writing, I might have a drink or two to have a buzz and write a little bit more fluidly. Now, does that necessarily mean that it's a crutch to my writing? No, of course not. But that also doesn't mean that I should never do it, right? Sometimes for me, it's something that's a little bit nicer to open me up. It's not something that I would consider a weakness in any way whatsoever. Now, here's the important part. When you start doing these patterns together, right? So for example, every time you write, you have to have a drink. That's when it can devolve into some dangerous territory where you feel like, oh, well, I can't be creative if I don't do X, Y, or Z, or I can't do this if I don't do that. When you start pairing these two activities together and thinking that's the only way to accomplish them, that's when these things can devolve into more serious problems. Now, for a lot of people watching this, they're going to think, well, alcohol is really tame. There's a lot of other drugs that are more serious. However, the same principle applies throughout most of the time, right? There are some drugs that you can use a little bit and they have some kind of mind-altering effect that's really not detrimental to your life until it becomes a precursor to completing other activities. A prime example here is the use of caffeine, right? Caffeine is rampant and it is also a drug. It works in exactly the same way. However, there's not as much stigma attached to it. So if you binge on huge amounts of caffeine, people don't bat an eye, but if it's alcohol, then they feel differently, even though it could be having the same effect on your happiness, right? If you feel like you can't accomplish anything without inducing a ton of caffeine into your system, then that's a problem for you because you are dependent on that substance to do certain activities. Now, I also understand that a lot of people who are adamantly against any form of drug use whatsoever have seen firsthand some really scary side effects that can happen. They've seen people go through things or act in certain ways that are absolutely destructive. I just get a little bit worried about applying that generally and saying that no one should ever be able to do these kinds of behavior because it affects people in different ways. For some people, they absolutely should not engage in any kind of mind-altering substance, but for others it can actually be beneficial, like I said, at a casual, indifferent type of use level. And again, just to clarify, I really think there are other better paths to happiness. A lot of people try to use various forms of drugs as a gateway into happiness, and I don't think that's sustainable in the long term at all. However, it can add some to your life depending on how you're using it and what you're using. We're always going to have examples on both ends, right? We're always going to have the abusive alcoholics and the Steve Jobs who's taken LSD. These different drugs impact people in different ways, and it's a matter of considering how the use is impacting you as an individual, making sure that it's not taking over your life or preventing you from doing other things or acting as a precursor where you say, I have to have this to do this. That's when you know you're running into some serious trouble. Also, obviously, if you're experiencing serious health impacts, right, negative side effects that are really causing you a lot of trouble, that's another big sign that your use has probably dipped into a place that's a little bit dangerous and a little more than would be casual. All in all, basically what I'm trying to get at here is actually drugs and happiness have a very interesting relationship where they can potentially be a useful booster. However, it's very easy to slip into a lot of these problem behaviors. So if you're going to use any kind of mind-altering substance, you need to be a little bit careful and pay attention to how it impacts you. There's nothing inherently wrong with using some of these things. You just have to be aware that if it's limiting your potential or decreasing your happiness in some other way, or you're absolutely reliant on it for happiness, then you're going to need to look for some alternatives. Let's move on to the exercise section. Number 1, is there any mind-altering substance you use on a regular basis? Is it helping or hindering your health and life? That's all I've got for this video, so as always, if you have any questions, comments, topics you want me to cover, throw them down in the box below. I'll get to them as soon as I can, and I will see you next time. You can check out more content at howtohappy.com. Also, don't forget to subscribe so you can stay up to date on the videos. We've also got a Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook that you can check out. Reflect, take action, and enjoy life. See you next time.